Welcome to Better Sex, where you get the information and inspiration to create and enjoy your best possible sex life. Join your host, sex therapist Jessa Zimmerman, as she brings you expert guests, helpful tips, knowledge, and strategies to improve your intimate relationships. And now, your host, Jessa Zimmerman.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Better Sex Podcast. This is Jessa, and I am, again, delighted that you're here. Today's topic, it's a little bit of a departure for me. It's a little bit more, not quite technical, nuts and bolts, ancillary to a sex life. We're going to be talking about birth control. And I wanted some really good information for people as a resource on the show. And then as my guest, Emily Aytes, talks about, it's a really good thing for couples to connect on and to discuss and to choose together. And if you're a couple that needs birth control, if you have that nailed down and you've picked a method that really works for you, you can relax and enjoy sex more. And I also wanted to do this topic because it comes up in therapy with couples. It'll be a barrier. This fear of pregnancy is really a deterrent in their sex life because they haven't quite figured out what they want to do about this, or they're not comfortable, or they're maybe struggling with the birth control they've chosen and trying to figure out what to do. I mean, even, this conversation is not just for teenagers or high schoolers or something like that. I think this is relevant for a lot of people. So for those of you that are looking either to figure out what birth control you actually want to use, or if you just want to get a well-rounded knowledge about the various types and options and how they work and what some of the choices are these days, so you've got that in your back pocket, you've got that information for other people, right, that it might be useful for, I think you'll get a lot out of it. So Emily Aytes is my guest. She actually teaches this stuff for Planned Parenthood. It's a perfect source to have the conversation. I hope you enjoy it. And before we start the show today, it is sponsored by Intimacy with Ease. It's a method to help otherwise happy couples achieve a sex life that is easy and fun for both of them, so that you can actually just enjoy your sex life with zero stress. For more information, if you want to watch a brief little training video that's available, all of that, go to intimacywithease.com. So Emily, thank you so much for being on the show with me.
Yeah, you're welcome. This is a great opportunity, and I'm so glad to be talking with you about a subject that I really love.
I'm glad you love it. I'm glad you're in the world doing this work. Okay, so the topic is birth control, and it seems like a big topic to me. There's so many different choices for people and stuff. Like how are we going to launch into this and talk about some of the most popular options, the main categories of kinds of things people that, might choose?
Yeah, you are totally right in the sense that it is a very complicated topic. It's probably one of the more involved topics that I teach in the classroom, just because there are so many different types of methods.
Right.
And along with all of those different types of methods, there's so many details. They all work differently. They all work differently with different bodies too. So that's a piece of it. So it can be really tricky to kind of figure out how to talk about birth control.
That's why I chose you to be here to do it.
And again, I think it's for young people, it's particularly confusing, at least from what they have voiced to me, is because it's something that just doesn't get talked about in detail.
Right.
So I think that's where a lot of confusion comes too.
Yeah. And I would imagine, I don't know exactly who listens to hello, everybody who listens to the podcast, but I would imagine it's not mostly young people. There's going to be people 20s to 80, so it's not like maybe their first exposure to birth control, but they still may not have a great wealth of knowledge or be, totally aware of the kinds of options that they might have. So,
Yeah. Yeah. It's, when you look kind of just generally at the history of sex ed and what's been taught in schools and how things are, now mostly abstinence based, those programs and historically have not even covered birth
yeah,
control.
right.
So it doesn't surprise me as an educator that I still get lots of questions about birth control from adults and older adults.
Yeah.
Because it's just a topic that there's a lot of mystery around.
Yeah. All right. So how do you want to tackle this? I mean, in my own brain, I'm thinking, well, there's hormonal and there's barrier method and there's, I mean, is that sort of how you want to go?
Yeah. What I was thinking about, because this is a lesson that I teach often in the classroom, and the most common things that I get asked about are what are referred to as LARCs, long-acting reversible contraception.
Okay.
And that is the IUD or the implant.
Okay.
I think everybody always asks about the pill because it is, what most people think about when they think about birth control.
Right.
And then there's a lot of different types of pills. So I think there's some confusion about what do each of these types do.
Right.
And then you brought up barrier methods, which I definitely consider to be a part of birth control. And so I get asked a lot about condoms. And when I do demonstrations in the classroom, I teach about external or male condoms, but I also teach about internal or female condoms.
Mm-hmm.
But I think a lot of the question is just about the external condoms too, because again, sex education programs, especially if they're abstinence-based programs, they don't even teach condom skills.
Right. And am I dating myself to bring in diaphragms into this? Do people still use those?
It's definitely still talked about. Every once in a while, I will get questions. Somebody will ask about a diaphragm.
Okay.
Oftentimes, like if it's a young person, they will say like, so I've heard about this thing called a diaphragm. What is that?
Yeah.
And then I can kind of launch into it. It's not part of our like normal spiel when we do the birth control lesson, just because I think it's not used as much anymore.
Okay.
And I think when you look at effectiveness rates, it's not as effective because there's more chance for human error.
Okay.
You have to do more things correctly every single time you use it for it to be effective.
Okay. So so maybe we can go through some of these. You could talk about basically what they are, how they work. Effectiveness rates would be really helpful too, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Definitely. Yeah. So I mentioned the IUD and the implant.
Mm-hmm.
Those I think always often come up in the classroom or when talking with adults, just because they just don't know what it is. They don't quite know what it does, either of them. And so a lot of the questions start with just a simple, explain this to me. What is this? And so the IUD stands for intrauterine device. And there are 5 different kinds, 4 of which are hormonal. And then 1 of them is non-hormonal.
Right.
So there's a lot of variety, between those types that, when you go in for an appointment to talk about birth control, these are things you would hope a medical provider would go over all the differences between the different types.
Yeah, and why somebody might want hormonal or not.
Exactly.
Okay.
Really, when you look at what the device is, it's a small piece of plastic that is in the shape of like the letter T. And it has some very small like strings that kind of come off of the end of it. Mm-hmm. And those strings are there purely just to help the medical provider with placement and during routine checkups, just to kind of make sure that it's still there, but then also help with removal too.
Okay.
When we're looking at effectiveness of the IUD, it's one of the most effective birth control forms, when I look at the Planned Parenthood website, which is a great resource for all of this information, with perfect use, it talks about it being about 99% effective.
And perfect use, that must just mean it's inserted properly, right? Because there's nothing that somebody with an IUD in is doing with this, right? Okay.
Exactly. Yeah, that's one of the benefits of an IUD is you get it placed by a medical professional, and then that's it. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to worry about it. So there's not a lot of effort. So it is a really effective form of birth control.
It works by, maybe I'm wrong, my understanding of that is it works by creating a little bit of inflammation within the uterus so that there'd be no implantation. Is that right? Kind of. Okay, I'm close.
You're close.
This is why you're here doing this and not me.
Yeah, and this is why I think this work is so important, because there's lots of information floating around on the the internet that we can get access to, and not all of it's the best.
Right.
Not all of it's medically accurate. So it's important to go over these kinds of things. So for the hormonal IUD, what happens with that is it thickens cervical mucus so that it blocks and kind of traps the sperm from swimming further to meet the egg.
Okay.
And then the hormones also stop the eggs from leaving the ovaries, what's called ovulation.
Okay.
So that's how that one works. And the other form, the copper IUD, looks exactly the same. There's no hormones, and it actually has like little spirals of copper wire on it, on the plastic. And that copper changes the pH balance inside of the body, and it helps to disrupt and kind of immobilize the sperm from swimming.
Okay.
So they can't meet with the egg.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
And how long, I mean, maybe it varies with the type, but roughly how long does an IUD last? And can people take one out and put one in the next, on the same appointment, like to get a new one?
It totally depends on the type in terms of how long they last. They can last anywhere from 3 to 12 years.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So that's a pretty wide range. Like the copper IUD, I believe, can last for up to 12 years.
Wow.
It's a pretty simple appointment that doesn't take a whole lot of time to get it inserted. And then the same for getting it removed. You make another appointment with your provider and they take it out. And essentially, too, it can be taken out whenever. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to go the 12 years. If you decide somewhere in that time period that you would like to try to get pregnant, you can go and remove it and you're kind of good to go.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. Some of the side effects with the IUD and kind of both forms of it. For the copper IUD, there might be some increased blood flow or cramping. Sometimes folks talk about spotting too. With the hormonal IUD, cramps, maybe a little bit more PMS. Again, sometimes hormones can impact people's mood. So you can kind of get mood swings, things like that. Also, spotting between periods, irregular periods. Those are kind of the main side effects.
Okay. Do some of them prevent periods totally?
Actually, the hormonal IUDs, one of the good benefits of it is that it can make your period better or less painful. I have seen where it can, I wouldn't say necessarily stop the period completely, but it can make the flow much, much less.
Okay.
I know other, like the birth control pill, some forms of the birth control pill, you can pretty much stop your period.
Right.
But it's not as much like that with the IUD.
Okay. Cool. And then you said the other long-acting reversible contraception. I think I have that.
Yes, I know there's so many acronyms in birth control. Yes, the other LARC, the other long-acting reversible contraception, is the implant. And the implant is also known as NEXPLANON.
Okay.
And it is about the size of a matchstick.
Okay.
And it's a piece of plastic, and it gets inserted into the upper arm by a doctor or medical provider. And what that does, again, it has hormones on that matchstick size rod, and it releases progesterone. And that, again, keeps the ovaries from releasing eggs, and it thickens the cervical mucus. So, again, it helps block the sperm.
Okay. And how long does that last?
That can last up to 4 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
Seems so simple.
I know, right?
Way simpler when I was using birth control, you know.
And again, it is one of those nice low effort methods because you get it placed and you don't have to worry about it. You don't have to do anything.
Right.
It is, you know, some people talk about it feels a little weird because you can feel it a little bit under the skin, but I mean, you kind of get used to that. It stays in place. It doesn't float around.
Okay, that's good.
That's another question that I get a lot from young people is like, is it going to float around in my arm? I'm like, no, it stays in place. And then when you want it removed, you go and make that appointment, and the provider takes it out pretty easily.
Okay, so it's easy to take it out as well as to insert it. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. In terms of effectiveness, again, it's a good, effective method. It's also 99% effective at preventing pregnancy.
Okay. And it seems to me that both of these may be that high. I mean, it's eliminated human error except with the placement of this by a provider, right? Like there's just nothing to remember or get right or put on right or fit or, you know.
Exactly. Or change or, yeah. That's what gets complicated with the other birth control methods because you have to remember the timing or you have to go to the clinic and get the shot.
Right.
So that can get tricky. Plus, you know, any barriers that you might have in your life might make that more complicated. So with these LARCs, it's nice because you don't have to do anything and you don't have to worry about it.
Okay. And if somebody gets that implant removed, is there some way, because it's been a hormonal thing before trying to get pregnant, is there any sort of lingering hormonal effect that takes a while before? That
is a good question. I'm not exactly sure on the exact amount of time, but I know it happens relatively, you know, quickly.
Okay.
As soon as it's removed, the hormones kind of work their way out, and you know, ovulation occurs again, and so it's relatively easy for somebody to get pregnant.
Okay. Cool. Should we talk about some of the other hormonal choices then?
Yeah.
Pills and shots, right? I don't think we had the shot when I was young enough to be using birth control.
Yeah. The shot is another one. I think, you know, people talk about it a lot, but they don't particularly talk about the specifics. Again, kind of like the name implies, it's a shot that you have to go to the clinic and have a medical provider give you. You go every 3 months.
Okay.
So again, the nice thing about that is you personally, other than driving yourself to the clinic or getting a ride there, you don't have to do much about it.
Right. Except remember to go in the right time.
That was what I was going to say. If you have a hard time remembering things, some of these other methods, that could be a problem for you in making sure that it's effective.
Right.
The shot often is called, or people often refer to it as the Depo shot. Mm-hmm. It's short for Depo-Provera. It works kind of like the other methods we've talked about. It contains progesterone. So that's going to keep the body from ovulating. So the eggs are not going to release from the ovaries. And it does the same thing too, where it thickens the cervical mucus. So the sperm is getting blocked from getting to the egg.
Okay.
So some common side effects, irregular bleeding, increased appetite. This is one where people often talk about not liking it because it could have increased weight gain.
Mm.
So that's one that I hear a lot from people about, well, I didn't like this one.
Yeah. Okay.
That, which, that's totally valid. So I understand that. Effectiveness rate, it's about 96% effective.
Okay.
And then the other thing that I always talk about when I talk about the shot with folks, just in terms of what works with your lifestyle, if you are somebody who is afraid of needles,
it seems like that might be self-explanatory, but yeah.
But I have mentioned this in classrooms before, and folks have gone, oh yeah, that totally makes sense. Like, if I don't like needles, this is not going to be a good method for me.
Right.
So it's something to think about when you're making those choices. Right.
Or getting, like you said, barriers to getting to a clinic on a regular basis or something, right?
Exactly.
Just access. Yeah.
Yeah. Just having, maybe you don't have reliable transportation, or, there's no public transportation. So that, that's a barrier to access too.
Right.
Yeah. So let's see. And then the pill, which every time I mention birth control in the classroom and I ask for folks to name kinds they've heard, the pill is usually the one that comes up right away.
Yeah.
There's a lot of different types of pills. So this is one, when I talk in the classroom about it, I always kind of say to make sure to talk to your provider about the different types.
Right. I'm not expecting you to go through like every single variety here. Right. Yeah.
And just kind of, they generally all work the same way. They stop ovulation from happening.
Right.
So that fertilization doesn't happen.
Right.
Each of the different kinds has different side effects.
Okay.
So again, that's always a good question to ask a provider about birth control, is what kind of side effects. Weight gain is often one that people talk about with the pill too. Folks often bring up mood swings, things like that, because of the hormone levels.
Is there much difference in effectiveness between the different kinds of pills, or is it really a matter of just which one suits your medical situation and the side effects and things like that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think when you look at overall effectiveness of just the pill of oral contraception, with typical use, so including human error, it's about 93% effective.
Okay.
And I think that's across the board for the various types of pills too.
Mm-hmm.
I think the most important thing, or at least the thing that I stress about the pill when I'm teaching about it, is it has to be taken every day at the same time every day.
Right.
And if you skip, it closes that window of effectiveness in terms of it continuing to work. And so if you are not a good daily pill taker, or somebody who forgets, this is possibly not the best birth control method for you.
Yeah.
So that's, again, why it's really important to look at your lifestyle.
Right.
And to look at what's going to work best for you.
Yeah.
One question that almost always comes up too when I teach about birth control, somebody will ask, well, what is the best birth control method?
Right. As if there's one that's best for everybody, right?
Right. Yeah. And that's kind of what I explain, is that there's no one size fits all. Birth control does not operate in that way. And it is really dependent on what somebody is going to use correctly and consistently.
Yeah.
And what's going to work with their lifestyle too.
Right. Hey everybody, it's Jessa, and we're just taking a little break in the show so I can share something exciting with you. At least I think it's exciting. You know, I wrote a book called Sex Without Stress, and I had turned it into an online course, and now I've reformatted it so that you can sign up at any time. It's more like an a la carte thing. For less than $100, you and your partner can work through this entire process, guided through webinars and assignments and conversations to have and real-world exercises to use to take the stress out of your sex life. So if you're in a good relationship but sex is the issue, this could be a perfect fit. And then separate from that, you can opt into my membership group, month at a time, or you can sign up for a whole year. That's where you'll get the personal support while you're working through the process. So it comes with Q&A sessions, bonus content, some guest presenters, and a private support community, like a forum. So that's priced separately so you can just participate in that when it's useful to you. Anyway, if you want to learn more, go to sexwithoutstress.com. And now back to the show.
I think another important thing that I bring up in the classroom when I talk about birth control, because like when I'm teaching, we don't divide classes by gender, so so it's mixed. And a lot of the times the male identified folks in the room will pipe up and kind of go, well, why do we have to learn about this? Like, this is stuff for girls. Like, this doesn't affect me. And I get it. But I will always come back and say, everybody benefits from knowing about birth control, whether or not they think they're going to use the information. They probably know somebody in their life who could benefit from that info.
Right.
And they know, they probably know somebody who it might help. So that's kind of always the answer that I come back to and that I stress is that, yeah, this might not be something that you use, but it could help a sister or a friend.
Yeah. Or if they end up in a heterosexual relationship, being able to share that kind of knowledge and burden with their partner, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And I think, as I was preparing for this, I was thinking about why it's important for couples to talk about birth control too. And that it really is a part of a healthy relationship to talk ahead of time before any sex happens, because you can both be on the same page.
Right.
And you can both decide what's going to work best for you.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of these birth control methods, yes, they are mainly for people with a uterus, but you can also use condoms with all of these methods. And when you do that, that increases the effectiveness of protecting against pregnancy, but then it also protects against STIs too.
Right. All right. So talk to me about condoms, or talk to us about condoms as birth control, because I certainly understand their importance of, preventing STIs.
Yeah.
But how good are they at birth control?
That is a great question, and one that comes up very often.
I'm eager to make sure I've told the right information to my children, which is that don't you also need a spermicide?
Well, I think what folks in the field have found is, at least to the best of my knowledge, we don't talk about spermicides really that much anymore, because I think folks found that it wasn't increasing the effectiveness any being used with condoms. And so, I mean, I think another piece of it too was that I know at some point in time they were making condoms with spermicide as well, but it's something that we don't talk about as much. It's kind of like the diaphragm, how we don't.
I'm totally dating myself here. This is what.
Yes, but it's one of those forms that I think it just leaves too much room for human error,
right,
in terms of using it correctly, and so it's just one that's not talked about as much.
Okay.
I kind of wonder how many people actually use it still, or, even know what it is, kind of a thing. When we're talking about just condoms, I'm talking about external condoms
Right.
that go on an erect penis.
Mm-hmm.
Those are 85% effective.
Okay.
And the effectiveness with condoms really depends on going through the correct steps and making sure that you're using it correctly every time that you have sex. There are a lot of factors that can influence how somebody puts on a condom.
Yeah.
Whether that is they're in complete darkness, or they're fumbling around because they don't know where the condoms are, or maybe they've never had to put a condom on their partner, or vice versa, their partner has always put it on for them.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of factors, I think, that can kind of mess up putting on condoms in the correct way.
Mm-hmm.
And then I know when I do these demos in schools, of course, kids always laugh because we bring in, models of a penis and condoms, and everybody gets to, practice that. So there's lots of giggles. But again, they always talk about too, like, they always end up saying, thank you for going over this with us, because like, they didn't cover this in health class.
Right.
They just said, use a condom.
Yeah.
or don't have sex.
Does the 85%, is that like real world effectiveness? So that includes the times they're not on right, or the times they break, or the times that they come off, or something? Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because it seems to me there is a lot of human error and life error that can happen.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And, when you look at that effectiveness too, if somebody is, say, for instance, on the pill and also using condoms, that effectiveness rate goes up.
Oh, yeah.
Even more. Yeah. So those combined methods are even better.
Okay.
I think what I always bring up in the class is when we're looking at condoms as birth control, they're easy to get. You don't need a prescription. You can go to Walgreens and get them. You can get them for free at clinics like Planned Parenthood. There's a ton of different ways you can get them. They're relatively inexpensive. So I think that's a great benefit. And, really anybody can buy them. There's no age restriction. So they're accessible.
Yeah.
Another thing to point out too, that I don't know if people understand or realize when you think about condoms, is that there's all kinds of condoms. There's different types, there's different textures, and really those are all about personal preference. And a lot of those added textures or the thinness of the condom is really about increasing pleasure or making sex feel better.
Right.
So I think those are good things to talk about too when you talk about condoms as a birth control method, because the next comments that always come up in the classroom for me about condoms are, oh, well, those don't feel good.
Right.
I don't want to use that. That doesn't feel good. That's going to kill the moment.
Yeah.
And it might, but you can also make it fun. You can talk with your partner and both be on the same page ahead of time, like we were saying, and already have condoms there.
Right.
You can go buy them together, kind of a thing. And I think it's interesting too that when you look at condoms in terms of increasing pleasure, they can also help delay ejaculation, so they can make sex last longer too.
Right.
Which I think is something people don't always understand.
Yeah. I mean, I think that we have to keep in mind, at least my mom used to say, our bodies are trying to get pregnant. And so it's always a certain amount of effort or, some cost benefit trade-off here about trying to prevent that, right? Nothing is, unless sterilization, I suppose, is right, permanent, never think about it again. But if you're not looking for that, or abstinence, then there's something you've got to give up for this.
Yeah, Exactly. Exactly. The other thing to point out about condoms too, some folks have allergies to latex.
Mm-hmm.
And so I also like to point out that there are non-latex options that have the same effectiveness rate, work just as well, and they're more easy to access nowadays too. I
Okay.
think before it was a little harder to get those condoms, but I've seen them on the shelves. We get them pretty easily to bring into the classroom for demos and things like that too.
Okay. Is it worth talking about, and again, maybe this is an outdated term, the rhythm method or natural family planning? Is that something you even group in a birth control conversation? Does that fit?
I mean, not so much in the classroom.
Okay.
In one of my other groups that I teach that is like very in-depth, comprehensive sex ed, we do talk about it a little, just so that the group participants are high school students, just so that they know what it is.
Mm-hmm.
I am not the best at explaining it, and I think the Planned Parenthood website and section about birth control does a fabulous job of explaining it.
Okay. So we'll send people there. I know I have some clients that use that, and it's come up before. And, because sometimes people are really certain they don't want to use any sort of hormonal method and don't want an IUD and don't think, I don't know, condoms, I guess, are somewhat effective. But anyway, it is an avenue people choose.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's why it's important to know about all the options, because you're exactly right that, it's okay not to want to do hormonal or non-hormonal birth control, or, it's your choice to use condoms or whatever method of birth control you want. So, I think it's important to give folks all the information, and sites like Planned Parenthood and Bedsider do a fabulous job of giving all of that information. And then it allows the individual to make their own choice for what works for them, what works for their relationship and their lifestyle.
Yeah. All right. So let's talk a little bit about, the common questions you get, the most common misconceptions or myths. I mean, I have a couple in my mind, I think, but I'd be curious, what are the things you get asked over and over and over again? Because even if it's teenagers, right, if it's high schoolers or something, it's probably adults who would ask these same questions.
Exactly. Yeah, I have found that to be true. A lot of the times teenagers are just they're more outspoken. They will say it because they sometimes want to get a reaction out of you. But a lot of the times adults have that same question. They just might not want to ask it.
Right.
A lot of the questions that I get are just kind of generally about how pregnancy happens.
Okay.
And again, I think, and this is just my own take on it, and from hearing what young folks have told me about their experiences with sex ed, and of course what adults have shared too, is that those basics of how reproduction works just get glossed over, or they don't get talked about in detail. So I think there's still a lot of confusion as to like what happens. So that's a question that I get a lot, and I just break it down into kind of an equation. Ovulation plus fertilization plus implantation equals pregnancy.
Okay.
And then I kind of break down, so ovulation, like we've talked about, is the egg releasing from the ovary.
Mm-hmm.
And then fertilization is when the sperm joins the egg. And then implantation is when the fertilized egg sticks to the lining of the uterus. And from that point is when changes in a cellular level start to occur in pregnancy.
Okay.
From there.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the most basic way that I break it down. And I've noticed with people across the age range, once I kind of break it down like that, they're like, oh, that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
it's a confusing topic because there's, really when you look at it beyond just that simple equation, there is a whole lot that goes
so
on.
wait, that brings to mind the whole Plan B, which we didn't talk about because so that would be before implantation, right? So this is that would technically be before pregnancy, right? So that's the morning after pill, is that what they call that?
The morning after pill. There's two different kinds actually. There's the morning after pill, which everybody knows that one. You can get it everywhere. There's two types. Plan B, you can get over the counter. You can get a prescription from a doctor's office, but you can also get it at Walgreens or CVS. The other one, Ella, you have to get a doctor's prescription for it. So you have to act pretty quickly after unprotected sex.
Yeah.
which makes that one a little bit trickier, and is again why I think most people tend to think about Plan B.
Yeah.
So emergency contraception has to be taken as soon as possible. The sooner you take it, the better it works, because like we were talking about, it stops the implantation from happening.
Okay.
Another, actually, and this is something that I talk about too when I talk about emergency contraception, another form that I don't think it's talked about a whole lot is the copper IUD can actually also be implanted or inserted after unprotected sex, and it is actually the most effective emergency contraception.
Wow.
So that's kind of interesting too.
Yeah, that I've never heard.
Yeah.
So what are some other questions or misconceptions that are out there?
Another question that comes up a lot is, can you get pregnant on your period? Which is a very valid question.
Right.
And the answer that I've kind of come to learn to give in response to that is yes, you can, but usually it's not very likely.
Right.
Because ovulation and menstruation do not always happen at the same time.
Right. Typically they don't. Right. So, but it wouldn't be possible to have something going on with your cycle. Right.
Yes, it is possible, but not as likely. The other question I get, which I guess you could kind of talk about it as a form of birth control. Young people are always asking about is withdrawal or pulling out. Is that a safe method?
Yeah.
And it is one that we include in our, like when we just talk generally about the different kinds of birth control methods, it is one that we include. I talk about it as being a behavioral method. Like you have to actually do something.
Yes, you do.
Right? The penis has to be removed from the vagina before ejaculation. And I think what I always try to point out with that is it's only 78% effective. So there's a lot of room for error there. And it's really difficult to figure out the exact moment every single time when ejaculation is going to occur.
And does pre-ejaculate contain sperm? I mean, is that also an issue for people to be thinking about?
That's like the follow-up question that I get is, can you get pregnant from pre-cum? So unlike semen, pre-cum does not contain sperm, but as it is traveling through the urethra, it can pick up sperm that are just kind of hanging out in there previous ejaculation.
Right.
So in that sense, the two can mix, and there is a chance that could cause a pregnancy.
Okay. Another question I've heard, or maybe I heard it, I don't know. Can you get pregnant without insertion? Like if somebody ejaculates, I don't know, how close to the vaginal opening, probably not on your foot. Like I can't imagine they swim up, but
right.
But what's the motility or the issues if it's outside of the vagina?
That is a good question. It is one that comes up fairly often. I always kind of answer it by saying, of course, context is everything.
Mm-hmm.
It depends, like you were saying, about what the proximity is to the, inside of the vagina and all of that. But if it were in any way to get inside the vagina, I guess there is a chance that the sperm could swim to the egg.
Yeah.
So that's always something that I point out. It's not, I would say it's probably not as likely, definitely depending on the circumstances or the context, but there's a possibility, there's a chance.
Right. Okay. Anything else come to mind that we should cover before we wrap up?
The last thing that I wanted to point out is something that I think, especially, I don't always get to say this to young people because I have to be a little bit more edited in schools, but I think it's really important for couples to understand that, like we talked about, talking about birth control and deciding birth control ahead of time is a really healthy component to a relationship and a sexual relationship with somebody. But it's also really great and can increase pleasure when you're on a method of birth control that works for you and your partner, and you don't have to worry about it.
Right. The relaxation that sets in there. Yeah.
Exactly. When you can relax and not have to worry about the consequences of what might happen, you can connect with your partner more. You can experience heightened sensation, more pleasure, and you can also explore more too. And so I think that's something that not a lot of couples or individuals think about when they're talking about birth control. But it's one of those things that if you decide what you're going to do and you pick the right method for you, it can definitely kind of be freeing in the sense that you can connect with your partner more.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So just, if you would, just say a little bit about where people could maybe get in touch with you, or, a little bit more about the kinds of resources they could find at Planned Parenthood.
Yeah. The best resources, kind of like I mentioned, on the Planned Parenthood website, there is a tab that you can go to if you go to plannedparenthood.org that says Learn. And it drops down and it brings up a whole variety of different topics. For birth control in particular, there's one whole section about birth control.
Okay.
And what's great about the Planned Parenthood website is you can actually pick one method and then pick another, and the website will compare and contrast the two.
Cool.
So it's really kind of a handy tool when you're looking at even particulars down to cost.
Yeah. Okay.
It'll factor those things in for you too. So that's really cool. The other one that I love to use and share with young people, just because the website itself is so interactive, is bedsider.org. They have a ton of great sexual health information in general, but they have a whole section about birth control methods. And I believe on there too, you can compare and contrast methods. It's written in a way where it just reads really easily. And they also include real stories from individuals who have used those methods. So that's kind of cool too.
Yeah.
To get good information from.
Great. I'll put both links to both of those, in the show notes so people can have easy access.
Great.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to have the conversation with me.
This was wonderful. I enjoyed it. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome.
You've been listening to Better Sex. Please visit our website, bettersexpodcast.com, for show notes and additional episodes.
And that's a wrap for today. I really hope you enjoyed the episode. If you are enjoying the podcast, if some of this material resonates with you and you would like to make a difference and make sure that this keeps coming out in the world once a week, ongoing, There are a couple things you could do to show your appreciation. The first would be to go to iTunes and rate and review the show. That really helps us be found by new listeners when you review the show on iTunes. You can find a link at bettersexpodcast.com/iTunes. The other thing I want to invite you to consider is becoming a Patreon. For a small monthly pledge, you get some benefits. So for $2 a month, you get advance access to every single episode. For $5 a month, you get a chapter of my upcoming new book. And for $10 a month, I host quarterly get-to-know-you and question-and-answer chats over the web, and you get invited to that. I would love to have your membership in that, become part of the Better Sex family. You can find a link at bettersexpodcast.com/Patreon, which is Patreon. Again, thanks for listening. I'm glad you're here. Feel free to comment, ask questions, get in touch. I'd love to hear from listeners. Thanks.